So what are you going to do with your life at this time? And what is it that when you do it, you lose track of time? You become totally absorbed in what it is you are connecting with, and it gives meaning to you. So this is one of the things, this is an individual thing. But when women as a whole go from being wounded in a sense of being, after a certain age, you are of no value, and that's a definite wound, to, well, now you are on, you can do with your innate talents what it is you want to do with your one wild and precious life. Like Mary Oliver, the poet, developed her poetic side in the second half of her life. I remember being on the stage in San Francisco with her. It was the first time she'd traveled that far. And there's this whole sense that there are these experiences in which you begin to realize that you need to sort of sense, what do you want to do with your own particular one wild and precious life? Because meaning matters.
Hello, ladies. Here is your friend Blanca Vergara. We are starting the second day of our conference, which is the day of International Women's Day. And we're starting with the bang with my dear Jean Shinoda Bolen. She is one of the pioneers on the subject of the divine feminine and the connection really scientifically. She's a medical doctor. Jean, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Let me say a couple of things about you, because you are difficult to capture into words. Jean is a medical doctor. She is a psychiatrist and a Jungian analyst. She is an international known speaker and author. She has penned 13 books, which are very influential, and they have so many foreign editions. Among them, you have the Tao of Psychology, Goddesses in Everywoman, Gods in Everyman, Ring of Power, Crossing to Avalon, Goddesses in Older Women, Crones Don't Whine, right. Artemis, the Indomitable Spirit in Everywoman, and I'm skipping some, but 13 books, this is not nothing. She has so many distinctions. She's a Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, a past clinical professor in psychiatry, University of California, San Francisco, and a former board member of the MS Foundation for Women, the Association for Transpersonal Psychology, and the C.G. Carl Jung Institute of San Francisco. She is a 2021 Lifetime Achievement Award honoree from Marquis Who's Who. So we are really honored to have you. And you really have, in the title that you offer to this talk, you're totally in resonance with what we have here. Thank you very much for being here, Jean.
Well, it's an adventure to be with you.
I love that. I love that it's an adventure. You have traveled wide and far in your journey as a woman and a psychiatrist and a scientist and as a goddess. I would like to give us a little bit of a taste of your journey that brought you here.
I need a kind of a sense of where you would like me to start.
I would love, because it's so big. It is so big.
It is. It is.
And the subject that we want to approach is the subject of the liminal phase. So if you can take us on what are maybe one, because there must be so many, moment of awakening that helped you come here, because I know that there are so many by now in your life.
Well, right now, we are in the reaching the end of the second year of being sheltered in place because of the pandemic and the risks of becoming COVID infected. And this has been an extraordinary time because we are in between what was and we can't go back. And in this 2-year liminal, and I love the word liminal because it's usually a much shorter phase than 2 years. Liminal is that threshold. You walk across it when you open the door and walk through it. That's a liminal phase as you are in between where you were and where you are going. So I love the word liminal, and I've been using it a lot because we have been in a 2-year liminal phase in which a lot has been happening. A lot of people have died. And there is global warming coming in, and we don't have very much more time, maybe a decade. Maybe we just have a decade to keep the temperature within the framework in which we can live. Probably it's at least 30 years, but the way it's going, it could be very short. And meanwhile, as you and I are talking right now, there's a whole question of what is going to happen in Europe around a potential of war between Russia and the rest of the world. So here we are on the edge. And you know, individuals in this time are there also because everyone has had to be limited by this situation. And it meant that you're in relationships that either work better or work not very well. And things are just changing. And I like the title of the overall conference, From Wounds to Wings. It assumes that there's a potential for women in general and for women in particular. If we are going to make things better for the rest of the world, it will have to do with individual women in circles working together to make changes and raise consciousness. And so, yes, women have been wounded historically a lot, but we entered a new world of the Aquarian age at the beginning of the year 2000 too. And the patriarchal age was for 2000 years prior. So here we are. This is a liminal time.
I went and researched the word liminality, and you know the answer that came? It came architecture. It came, you are in a different place. You're in a hallway. You are in a place where it's no longer where you were, and it's not where you are going to be. And it's this title that you are no longer wounded, but you don't have yet the wings.
Yeah.
And it's magical. It's full of possibility where we are right now.
It's very much like how a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. You're in this in-between place in a chrysalis where the old dissolves and reforms, and their potential exists to come out of the cocoon and fly.
Yeah.
And that's where we all are.
This great potentiality of the Aquarian age, letting go of hierarchies, but that's the only thing that we know. How can we let, what is that? What is, and here it comes the divine feminine. Tell us more about the Aquarian age and why is that so important for women?
Well, I think about the Aquarian age as being one in which you're supposed to be a much more egalitarian time, because in this particular age, which is very much represented by the birth of the goddesses, you know, I keep referring back to the metaphors of the Greek gods and goddesses because it's a one cultural norm that we almost all have had educationally. And so they keep getting interpreted. But there is the idea of the Artemis woman who was the firstborn of twins, and her brother, she was the goddess of the moon, and her brother's got Apollo's the god of the sun. And so in this particular time, there's a sense of the equality of men and women coming in. So that's sort of why I refer to Artemis as the part of us that has a sense of going into the wilderness, not like Athena in the city, but in the wilderness. She's the goddess of the hunt, so she can aim for her target and hit it. She is the goddess who represents the women's movement. And the women's movement is something that I was part of from the very beginning, because the women's movement began in the end of the 60s. And it seemed to be that it was just women talking to one another. And it was diminished. It was like nothing, women just talking. But women were doing much more than talking. They were sharing visions and supporting one another and creating conferences. And between the late 60s and the beginning of the 70s, we went through the liminal threshold into the 70s. And the 70s was the decade of the women's movement. And so there was this amazing time when women started to blossom. And then they were sort of put down, and women went and got educated and went into different fields that women had never been in before. And a lot of people, women people, were saying something about, but I'm not a feminist, because feminism got to have a bad name for some people. So that was the beginning of a number of women who now are in congresses and governments and in businesses and in sciences. And women were never there in numbers at all prior to the women's movement. So here we are at the edge of what will happen next. And there are lots of us here. And the idea of most women have had to advance on their own a lot, but they're coming together often in the idea of a circle. So one of the things that I've been very much an activist for was the idea of the millionth circle, how to change ourselves and the world. Mm-hmm. Because we come into a particular family and a particular culture, and they've got a pretty strong sense of who we should be and what they want us to be. And then the first part of women's lives, girls from girl to womanhood, usually if you can conform to what your family wanted, you did. But then there is a time when you start to have a sense of connecting with other women, the sort of idea of sisterhood. And you start to see that it's possible to be different than you were raised to be. And that's where women are right now in so many different ways.
Yeah. I find that, my background is, I was born in 1970. So I was in that group of women who could go to engineering university. Yes. And I grew up with the idea that being intelligent was doing what my father did and my mother was stupid. And I went all the way to being really masculine, really aggressive, really towards the being, like becoming a man. Mm-hmm. And what I feel now is that it's a kind of a new a renaissance of the feminine, going back to being present, going back to ancestral, to something very delicate that we have lost. Is that also Artemis? Because what I hear is going to the wild woman.
Well, you see, before the Greeks were clearly a patriarchal society, but the Greeks came after millennia of other times. And so when you start to look back at what was created prior to patriarchy, it was rather natural to see that women, or the feminine of all creatures, from human to little dogs, that it's always the feminine that is birthing new life. And really, until it became knowledge that it's a coming together of the ovum carried by the feminine and the sperm carried by the masculine, it was obviously clear that divinity would have given birth to humans, and divinity would have been a mother goddess. So that was the way it was prior to patriarchy, a sense that, and then there's Mother Earth. Everything is born out of the earth, Mother Earth. And it is in the United States, among the indigenous Native Americans, there has been a balance between Father Sky and Mother Earth. But that has not been true in the educated world of from Greek to Europe to America, that whole thing. So we are learning and feeling where we have come from, and we're discovering that we can be both a force, educated force, an idea. We can be leaders, but it's a very individual thing. We have the potential in us, and we better develop it pretty soon because there's not much time to transform ourselves and the world into a very livable place where we value life and we're just part of life. We're not dominant over. You see, patriarchy always had the problem of saying that we were superior over everything. And to be related rather than power over, you go from hierarchy to circle.
Yeah.
And that's the movement that is going on right now.
Beautiful. So when I stop personally referring to superior and inferior, and I start creating circles, I start creating ripple effects to the community that I have, even if I am the director of whatever company.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. What do you started developing on the faces of women? You start as a little girl, and then you please, and then you discover that you can be something else. And then I think this is where we are.
Actually, when you introduced yourself and your particular age, you are right in that place in between. Most women pretty much make every effort to conform to what the combination of family and significant others want of us. And then there's also the fact that up until a certain age, you could give birth to children. And so there's a vulnerability and the choice and the expectation, do you really want to be a mother? You know, for the first time with the women's movement, there's a realization that some women were made to be mothers, and this was a way they could become who they were meant to be. And there were other women who really did not connect with that. And their kids also often suffered because there wasn't a kind of connection, maternal connection. On the other hand, the mother that was too bonded to the child becomes almost too hovering. And so it's when we become individuals and develop our different aspects of ourselves that things change in us, and the next generation also is. Well, when you get to this liminal phase where things can change and you're of the age where that could happen because you can go forward as a leader, it's like this is a time when, in the age of patriarchy, when a woman got to the end of her childbearing age, it was like, well, you can take care of the kids, go to the background, you know, you're done. But actually, it's just the opposite now, that you get to the time, the question of whether you had children or not, you're out of the vulnerability of having children if you didn't want one, but somebody raped you, for example. And instead, in this culture, at least in the Western culture, you've had an opportunity to be educated, to travel, to realize how different and how similar so many people are. And now what? What do you want to do? It's a famous line with a poet named well, anyway, Mary Oliver, who says something to the effect of, tell me, what do you want to do with your one wild and precious life? And wild for me always meant what you were born with, that inherent kind of archetypal qualities or inherent instincts that you had as a little girl. I mean, when you see even babies in bassinets, they're the energetic ones, and they're the ones that are just passive. So you start to see from the very beginning that there's an aspect of the person from babyhood into to toddler, into adolescent and whatever. And you begin to sense that some of those qualities, especially around adolescence, are stifled or encouraged. And then you go through the childbearing age where you're expected to be married and have children. And then you reach the end of the childbearing age and you're either going to be very much into parenthood or you're not. And so at that particular point, the question is how fast life goes by. It's very surprising how you get as old as you are, as fast as you are, as fast as you got. Now, and then when you get to the point where you realize that you only have as much time as you've lived so far to live. So what are you going to do with your life at this time? And what is it that when you do it, you lose track of time? You become totally absorbed in what it is you are connecting with, and it gives meaning to you. So this is one of the things, this is an individual thing. But when women as a whole go from being wounded in a sense of being, after a certain age, you are of no value, and that's a definite wound, to, well, now you are on, you can do with your innate talents what it is you want to do with your one wild and precious life. Like Mary Oliver, the poet, developed her poetic side in the second half of her life. I remember being on the stage in San Francisco with her. It was the first time she'd traveled that far. And there's this whole sense that there are these experiences in which you begin to realize that you need to sort of sense, what do you want to do with your own particular one wild and precious life? Because meaning matters. So if you go from, the idea of taking flight, there's such a joy in becoming who you were meant to be. And that is sort of the sense for me of, as a Jungian analyst, the word is individuation, but I translate it into becoming who you were meant to be, not who you were expected to be even before you were born. And then you either complied or you really got into trouble because it didn't fit. And when you are in charge of your own life, that is that point where what you love, who you love, what you're responsible for, whether you grow or whether you don't. A lot of people don't do much growing, but when you want to do something and you'll focus on it and you develop whatever it takes to do it, there is a sense of it's both hard and it's joyful. And this is why I kind of like the whole notion of the caterpillar to the butterfly, and that in between place where you're in the chrysalis, where you're developing from who you used to be. And will you take wings? I mean, that's your challenge of what you're doing, this whole idea of you're encouraging women to take wings. Isn't that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And what about your inspiration for that exact title?
Oh, wow. The story is that a couple of years ago, well, for a long time, I was behaving like a person who had trauma. I didn't know what trauma was. And a few years ago, I remember that I was sexually abused.
You were what?
I was sexually abused at 14 years old.
Yeah.
And what was magical about remembering that was that, wow, now I understand everything that happened before. now I can forgive. Now I can release. Now I can let go. And now I can ask myself that question, who I want to be.
Yes.
And what it came very clearly is that I want to hold the space for other women who don't know what happened in the past, why they behave in a weird way, why sabotage themselves, their own happiness. And they don't know either what they are wanting. They are really in this cocoon, in these hallways, the liminal phase. So that's why I created this conference, because I totally recognize the power of the circle. Women heal in sisterhood.
Now, the small book I wrote called The Millionth Circle, How to Change Ourselves and the World, assumes that there is in the center of the circle, first of all, there's a sense of sisterhood, which is a mixed feeling for a lot of women, because women have had trouble with other women. Not all women have a sense of sisterhood. There's just, there's the getting to know one another and trust one another and start to tell one's own truth. And within a woman's circle, it can become like a cocoon or an incubator where something new in you that wants to grow is supported by the energy in the circle and the spiritual or sacred energy that needs to be also known as part of the circle. Because there's something about when people get together and they connect at the heart level, and they have a sense that in silence, like I've been in a personal women's circle with 5 other women for over 30 years. It's a long time. And we watch each other grow through stages of life. There's been ended relationships and new relationships. There's been watching what happens to our children as they grow into adulthood. There's all of the sharing of the experiences that happen, and within a circle, it's not like we are supposed to fix each other. We can't, but we can share and support, and in silence. In my particular group, we go into silence at the very end of the circle, because for some people it's a time to pray in silence. For other people, it's to meditate or to visualize, or to just connect with one's own heart and the heart connections of the sisters in that circle. And what happens over time is that energy in the center keeps growing, and you tap into it, because we're not there to fix each other. We are there really to believe and hope and pray and share the ins and outs and difficulties of life. And one of the things is, it's really easier and easier to form circles. The word circle has become a definite part of the vocabulary in the United States. It used to always be groups. Now circle is used very commonly. And it's very important, especially like during this pandemic, to have the ability. We're talking, you're in the Netherlands, I'm in California, and yet we're talking to one another. And the women who listen in can be from all over. Well, that happens on a more intimate level. You may have gone to school with certain people in a certain part of the world, and then everybody scattered. And you lost track of one another unless you wrote to them or something. And then there's a pandemic when everything is sort of shut down, at least they are in the United States, and you are sheltered in place. But you can connect with your best friends back in college. You can connect with your cousins that are in another country. You can, and suddenly when you start to feel the warmth of connection, and you start to have regular meetings, so that yes, we'll meet. My women's little women's circle happens to meet for about 2 hours every other Wednesday afternoon. Different people meet at different times and some, so it's an opportunity to stay in touch. It's an opportunity to ask for support and to get it. And that invisible support, that spiritual sacred energy really does exist. You can tap into it. And when you tap into it, you feel lifted and cared for. And that's really something that human beings have had. I don't, it could be that dolphins have it. It could be that some other instinctual animals have something, but it's only human beings that have language, have the variety of us has to do with a little bit of height and skin color. That's all. There aren't all variations. Like when I think about the variation on the little dogs, for example, and big dogs, there's such a difference in size and whatever, but human beings, we actually are very much alike. And one of the things we have is language and a connection with divinity, whatever divinity is, which is far greater than any of us could ever really fully know. So we watch, if you go back in our historical timing, you realize that there's always been, at times, not always, but there's been times where there's been a certain religious power orientation in which everything was defined according to the rules of that particular religion. Well, whenever you pray and feel connected to divinity, whatever it is feels both real and beyond your ability to narrow it into some hierarchy of some sort. So I think that's what you're working on, and with this particular series is to realize that I mean, you go from wounding to flying, and when you are wounded because you're in a hierarchy and you're wounded, you're in patriarchy. It's a woman is wounded because she doesn't have a penis, and what is left out is that a woman can birth new life, but that became no big deal. But it really, really is. And so,
sorry to interrupt you. That became a bad thing. Oh, you're just a stay-at-home mom.
yes, yeah.
Sorry.
So both masculine and feminine really do need to come together to create new life. And we also need to keep evolving as human beings, hopefully.
Yeah.
And we're in that liminal place between the history of human beings up to this point and what's going to happen depending on global warming. So here we are in this in-between place where what each individual woman and men who have a sense of being connected at the feminine, what we call the feminine level, or masculine level, it's just language in a lot of ways, but there is something about how little boys are stifled at a very young age to not be a crybaby, not to have feelings, not to be sensitive. I mean, there is so much that is clamped down on the little boy so that he develops the left logical brain and not the right-sided brain, which is creative, which is open, which can hold opposites and can hear music and various things. And so that the development of a human being depends upon heart and brain, but the brain is to develop both the right and left side of the brain. And we as women have had much more of an opportunity in the last 100 years, or last 50 years at least, to develop the masculine and feminine of our brains. We can get educated, but we also have the other side, the aesthetic side, the art side, the music side, and boys who, for example, have a natural right-sided brain and love music and whatever, and feelings, they're often stifled by the same culture that stifled women from being smart or being focused I mean, so we're in this in-between place now where the
Absolutely.
potential really to become whole people is growing.
It's so exciting. It's so exciting. The way now in retrospect, the one of the most powerful ways in which I heal myself before knowing that I had to heal anything was nature.
Yes.
I started painting trees, and
Mm.
by just by looking at them, I didn't know that I was healing myself. And I want to just bring you ask you to share with us a little bit of your wisdom on this, because you have a book specifically on the subject of trees, women, and healing. And I think this is
Yes.
very pertinent for what we are, for this challenge of being in this liminal phase.
Yes, it's the book I have written, and there's a called Like a Tree, How Trees, Women, and Tree People Can Save the Planet. And Terry Tempest Williams has written the introduction or the preface to this new volume of it. And she's been such an activist for women in nature and things like this. And the thing about trees and women, and I was talking about right and left brain earlier, and I remember when there was a president of the United States, President Reagan, who made a famous comment, "You've seen one tree, you've seen them all." Oh, wait a minute. Each individual tree has its own life, shape, fruits, flowers, whatever it is. And when you go out in nature, you start to feel connected, as you mentioned, you start to feel connected to the nature around you. And I know my first experiences was as a Girl Scout, going up to Girl Scout camp up in the mountains in Southern California and sleeping out of doors under these wonderful Monterey pines. No, they weren't the Monterey pines. They had another name. I'm trying to recall what but the pine trees, and to see the moon and sleep under the moon and things like that. There gets to be a sense of the sacredness of nature. Now, that's like feeling love. How can you know that you love? How can you know that what's sacred? It's very, very subjective, but it's very, very real. And when you, as a human being, connect with love, connect with nature, feel one with, you feel supported by the mother planet and the father sky. And it really is like an amazing thing. It's an amazing thing to see the Earth from outer space, which just this year, there's for the first time since we sent men to the moon, once, I think it was in the 70s, it's just this year that the United States has sent a satellite way out to take pictures of the sky from further out than from here. But when we saw the Earth from outer space, the astronauts were making a big deal about going to the moon. But what really made the difference for humanity was when they turned around and took a picture of the Earth from outer space, and she, Mother Earth, was beautiful and one. There are no national boundaries. It glows in the sky, and around the Earth, there's only the moon that they were headed for. So there we are. And to think that we all share this one planet. We all have the same Mother Earth, Father Sky. And incidentally, it does seem like some of the wisdom of the Native Americans are sort of coming in to the American psyche, which is, again, certain things need to come in time before global warming wipes out this beautiful, beautiful place that we live in.
Yeah, that's so exciting. The more I talk to people, I'm originally Mexican, and my education at home was very Toltec.
Mm-hmm.
And now I can talk about that, because before it was Catholic school, just you don't talk about the Toltec. And now this has to come out, and I can talk about it, and people want to listen about it. It's so exciting. And I talk to other people with their traditions, and we see, oh, your goddess had snakes. Yeah, my goddess too. My goddess as well. It's so exhilarating that we are really awakening and remembering who the power of the divine feminine. Oh, Jean, I now I kind of had the idea of why you have written so many books and why you have so many plans to continue writing. And it's a pleasure talking to you. I could talk to you forever, but just to keep the conference more or less on time, I'd like to start saying goodbye. So I would like to ask you the one last question to connect with your intuition and feel what could be that one thing that could round this talk and help women who are listening.
Well, I really encourage women who may be listening to consider forming a group, a circle. You can, and it can be either virtually or in person, or both, but to connect with friends or others that you have had a connection with. You haven't known well for a long time or anything, but the sense of gathering and seeing about how it would be if we talk together about what really matters to us, or what we are doing, or what we are concerned about, and start to be real with one another, and find that there is an archetype of the circle. The more circles there are, the easier it is to drop in and form a circle of your own. I mean, really, that is the truth of it. It's why the idea of the millionth circle is not it is a symbolic number, that when there are the millionth circle, then there will be a tilt in the entire culture, and there will be an egalitarian humanity rather than power over humanity sorts of things. The circle is a place where you can incubate an idea, you can give birth to an idea, you can be supported by the sisters in the circle to get ready to do what it is that you are poised to do. And the other thing is that we have the expression, we have your back. And that means that when you go out and dare to do something, to speak truth to power, to put out a vision of what you would like to do, or you introduce a manuscript that you've written, or you paint something and you really want to show it, you share what it is you're risking and showing with the sisterhood of your circle, and they have your back as you move out to do what it is you were meant to do at this particular time. And each step helps you to become who you were meant to be. And you cannot get through life without suffering. And it's how you react to the suffering that makes the difference. When you described the sister's system of being raped and then forgetting. So many women have had that same experience. And the thing of it is that just because somebody treated you as if you were a nothing or a body that could be used, don't accept that definition as to who you are. You have to remember, reconnect, and realize that you have overcome, as people have had to overcome. You can't get through life without suffering all kinds of different things. So suffering goes with quite a bit of life, but you have to overcome it and find your vision and your strength and your joy. You have to be with people that you can laugh with and cry with and be with truly yourself as you keep being born into the world, into your next level and next level and next level, and then turn around and start to support others. Sometimes it is through helping other people that you have the greatest satisfaction. And it varies from person to person. What is your greatest satisfaction? And can you do that and become yourself. And in the end, it's the idea of becoming who you were meant to be through the suffering, through the joys, through the decades of life.
Oh,
And the other thing is, the older you get, the more you realize how fast life goes by.
I'm enjoying it so much. I'm just 52, but it feels like liberation. Is
Oh, nice. Nice.
I'm loving it. I'm really loving it to have more gray hair and more opportunities to say, no, I don't do that. And yes, I do that. More discernment. Oh, Jean, what a pleasure. What a pleasure. Ladies, I hope that you, of course, have fun. The people who haven't met Jean, now you know her. And I'm super grateful for your time and for your wisdom. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much, ladies. And well, we continue with the conference. Thank you, Jean. Did you enjoy this? Here is a selection of other videos that I feel you will love. And please don't forget to subscribe, to like, and to share. Love and light.